Jo-Anne Driessens is the 2021 Mittelheuser Scholar-in-Residence. Jo is a notable First Nations photographer, heralding from Queensland, and her project is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Lens Perspectives. Could you please put your hands together to welcome Jo to the podium this afternoon?
Fancy me being in front of the lens. I just want to make sure I've got the ticker right. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful story, Rachel. I just think it's so fitting that we're talking together this afternoon. Very hard to hold back a tear too. So, my name is Jo-Anne Driessens. I'm returning to the library after many years of being professionally trained here. I want to explain exactly my connections in a couple of slides. So just before we begin, how does this work? It's the green one. Oh, there we go. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge where we are on country. I've had the pleasure of working and building the new building, Quildargan, and all the amazing community that helped shape that place and the rest of the building. Those kind of people that I've worked with have also shaped who I am, and including my family. I'd like to also acknowledge my elders here today, and I have a very similar story to Rachel. I have my Driessens family and my Aboriginal blood family, the Chambers family, who some of them are here today, so that's very, very special. So before I nut down into exactly who I am and what I fit into, because my story is quite big too, I just wanted to share with you where I landed with the objectives in my research. Quite an extensive list, and I had a really big idea, and the ideas have really funneled towards my ongoing work as a photographer since the early 90s, I guess, and having been professionally trained and printing a lot of the collection. I really love seeing the images up like this big, because I used to print them in the darkroom downstairs for 6 years straight, and I got to know the collection really well, like through the negative form, and actually casting the light on it, making them the positive form. So, yeah. So if we can just quickly, I just wanted to give you an insight. I want to really reconnect with the collections, and I really didn't think I'd be able to be doing this in my career. So had to kind of pinch myself a few times walking in, and it was like the red carpet's rolled out for you, and the staff are incredibly knowledgeable. The subject matter selection process was quite difficult. I guess I really wanted to know who the photographers were if I could. I was looking at material that I might have been familiar with, but to sit down and actually dig a bit deeper. What their equipment references might have looked like. I've got some of that information up in the White Gloves room with the William Kennett collection and the Harriet Brims collection. What were their motives? I guess that was the big one that's been sort of stirring even before I did this research. When I've been printing and photographing myself in, I guess, the community and encouraging other photographers, what are their motives? And while, as a photographer, we just love taking photographs, I think it's really important that I'm encouraging people from this research, and particularly in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across the state, to actually start thinking about what they can offer the collection. To add to that timeline, we've got the accessibility status of the collection, how material came to be acquisitioned, and so on. So the copyright status is very new to me. I just used to shoot and didn't really think about it just because I love taking the image, and printing it was even just the best part of it being the magic process. But now I've started working with Arts Law Centre of Australia, and I work with some incredible lawyers who have helped me understand what all of that means. I'm not actually a librarian, so I just always used to make that really clear to people. I worked at the State Library, but I'm not a librarian, I was a photographer. So, yeah, and the list goes on and on. So, just sort of get my notes. So here we go, my journey. So this particular image, I was fortunate enough to have that acquisitioned around 2015 alongside about 60 other images. And I just really wanted to show this image today just to ground myself a bit and share it with the community again, because it's got a lot of familiar faces in it. It was taken out the front of the Roma Street bus station, if anyone remembers that. And it was an incredible day. It was really cold, and Uncle Bob Anderson right there in the middle. So yeah, I just wanted to show the contemporary side of the collection, which I've been able to add to, but of course I'm looking for more Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander content. So who am I? I'm Jo-Anne Driessens. I grew up with the Driessens family in the western suburbs here at Moggill. We've got a really amazing photographic collection in our family. So all my photographs growing up have been captured quite well, but obviously being adopted, I just wanted to know who I look like. So when I started working at the Queensland Museum in the early 90s, actually as a voluntary, the image on the left is my great-grandmother. At the time when I was sort of working with that image, I didn't know who that woman was until a little bit later on. A lot of the elders I was meeting at that time were related, but again, I didn't know who they were. However, Uncle Mick, who's here today, his mother is my grandmother, and I was able to bring her into to see the collection, and then we got to identify people. And so even then, when you have so much information about the family and the photographs, it still doesn't take until a few years later for it to really sink in. I'm just looking at you, Rachel, because I feel that. The other image is my great-grandfather, and I love this image too because I was printing that one here at the State Library, and again, I didn't know this person. But if you look at the Tyndale collection, even though it's restricted sort of material, the images are actually just like the headshot, but I managed to find the full negative and did the full torso upwards, and you can see the number. So even though there's not a very nice history attached to a lot of these images, I embrace it because it helps me make sense of the perspective that it was taken in. So this is an image that sits in the collection here, and that's my great-grandfather on the far left in the back, holding the massive, I think you call it a tuba or euphonium. And I sent that recently as a beautiful digitised image to my Auntie Sandra at Cherbourg in the ration shed, and she'd never seen such a clear image of it. So I'm just about to share a little bit about the Cherbourg collection as well. So the Ration Shed Museum was launched sort of just after, I'm just trying to think, my little fella was just born. So that's like 2005 or 2006 from memory. And I just think it's a really good example. I thought I'd tie it into my research because it's connected to me and the family. I've been repatriating images back to their museum, but they've also, utilised images from the museum and the library into their collection. And again, I just presumed the aunties had that image at the museum, but they do, but it was a photocopy of a photocopy. So we're going to work now towards getting beautiful images done. And I know that if that came through the darkroom, Raina, who was my former mentor, would never let me make an image that was not presentable or really clear or sharp. So I've been taught by some really amazing technicians in photography, which I'm also very grateful for. So I wanted to play this video because I found it really important to share the voice.
Morgan. As the president of the Ration Shed Museum in Cherbourg, I would like to welcome you to our memory website. I'm standing inside the Ration Shed Museum. On the wall you can see our timeline, which starts back before the arrival of the colonists. It tells the story of our dispossession and the introduction of the Aboriginal Protection Act, and then the beginnings of the Baramba-Cherbourg settlement in 1901. And then the decades of the 20th century developing into what it is today. We have taken elements from this timeline and created a website, which you are looking at now, and it is called The Memory. It captures the timeline in a digital form, using it as a doorway into the many other photos, videos, oral histories, documents and artefacts that tell the story of Cherbourg. We are keen for the people of Cherbourg, or the Murris of Queensland, the Australian Indigenous people, to engage with us on this site and help tell our story. Please participate by adding comments, thoughts, new ideas and interpretations. We also welcome your contribution of photos and videos. We welcome all Australians and all the people around the world to the memory. We hope you get to know us better and about our lives here in Cherbourg.
So with an active family of historians who work tirelessly towards the growth of their own cultural precinct, it is just as relevant to make collecting institutions aware of photographs such as this one of the renovated cottages on Baramba Avenue, Cherbourg 1956. So while this image may not look aesthetically of value and isn't a classical, typical Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation of images, to me it's got a rich history, because I know now when I actually had the conversation again on the phone with Auntie Sandra and just said, so that image is definitely the house of the family, and I know the family that are here today will recognise it straight away. I've never seen that image properly, but I photographed that same Baramba Avenue area since I've been visiting the Cherbourg communities in the 90s. So after many conversations and photographing the same sort of activities around there, I can see now that the bunya tree, when you go there, if you've ever been to Cherbourg, you'll just look out for that bunya tree. I know there's lots of bunya trees there, but this one was apparently planted by my great-grandfather's brother, and the house there has held 7 generations and continues to today. So I just wanted to show an image that has such rich value but may not be able to be identified by people who aren't connected to those communities. So that's where I want to bring in the voices. And with that kind of example too, is to encourage other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to look at their own communities and the infrastructure and the roads. Like I know there's a bitumen road there now. So I wanted to include the arts industry, because over the last 10 years I've been an arts worker and curator, maintaining my research and photographer aspects as well. So between 2014 and 2022, I was managing the South Stradbroke Island Indigenous Artists Camp, and it was initiated during my time at the Gold Coast Arts Centre, and this idea was birthed by Judy Watson. So she's got a beautiful work just outside Quagoma called Torres, and the 5-day camps were an annual professional development. So this is another aspect of the community that I think really, I just wanted to show that how much they value the collection. So this is a quote from Libby Harwood, who was on the 2015 camp. It was during this time she was really reconnecting with her family history. And even as an artist, people might just think it's just it's quite a fun thing to do. But when I've worked with artists, it's one of the hardest jobs I've ever had when you have to work alongside an artist. I know there's artists in the room today. In particular, we were fortunate enough to have Michael Laird, because that's sort of part of his country, the Yugambeh and Quandamooka region, share his extensive family history information and old photos throughout the week, which has informed a number of ways that artists continue to work and reconnect with their identity. Just also recognising the impact Rachel also had on her research around identity. A lot of people are still finding their way home, and these collections that hold images and material about their ancestors really are beneficial towards health and well-being. While I was managing the overall camp, I was also understanding the importance of photographing the process, which has benefited the publication. So this is where I get to my library knowledge. While I was doing that, I was making sure the library books had ISBN numbers and that they actually feature in the collection up here. This is another example. Megan Cope's got some of her work down in Kurraldargan in the mapping process. And I just really love seeing how artists work and have been invited back time and time again to photograph their process and to learn more about their own family history. I love the power of the camera too. So we need more photographers out there capturing these different areas of community. And I think it's important that we continue this conversation after my research with the library staff to sit down and see what that looks like. So some of you may already know Delvine Cockatoo Collins. This particular year as well, in 2015, when Fiona Foley led the camp, Fiona's got a really extensive, beautiful body of work upstairs called Black Opium, one of my favourite works. But again, she was inspired by the fact the family history that she was actually discovering that week as well, even though she's been close to country most of her life. So we can't just presume that everyone understands their identity. But if anyone has bought or watched the evolution of Delvine's work too, the beautiful weaving print that she did, that was based from the camp in 2015, talking about the 7 generations of her family. So I just think it's a nice insight how we can capture that too on camera and quotes. So with a desire to know more about the Bunya history, I started photographing them around southeast Queensland not long after COVID, but I've always grown up, you know, even with my Driessens family, I was taken to the Bunya Mountains, but now I have this new kind of connection with them and understanding the depth of their history. This is just another example I wanted to show photographers. I know we've got photographers in the room and possibly online, but also the then and now sort of approach is comparing what you can mimic kind of what was happening or what looked like and what you can capture. So part of the process will be me continuing to bring back in photographers to sit with the work and the collections and unpack their connections to their communities and look at that sort of mirrored effect. So looking, just to also share a little bit of insight, I looked at the 19th and 20th century photography. Some of it's upstairs. I'm not sure if you've seen it. The table I've got is the first table when you go in the white gloves room. But I wanted to go back to the early Barambah images just because of my family connection and my familiarity with printing them extensively over the years I was doing my cadetship here. So the William, I just wanted to also express too, I was really excited to hear about the William Turton Kennett collection has recently been repatriated. It's actually listed as rare and restricted, but I wanted to just shout out to the library staff, what an incredible job that was to get that work back. I think that's a really big aspect of even the work I've done, repatriating it back to a community like the Ration Shed is a really key point in if the communities can actually house those copies of the images, that's what we need to look at. And so, yeah, the bottom one was Harriet Brim's equipment. I was really excited to discover the equipment that was hiding in the little boxes inside the vault. So I immediately put in a request to pull out as much as I could. I didn't think I'll be able to because of the fragility, but when you look at them, they look like they were made yesterday. And I really appreciate the early image making process, let alone the cameras that were used at the time. And I think the library's done a really good job in, you know, approving that kind of material to come in, so I hope they do more. So if we go a bit more recent, some of these people I have worked with quite extensively, Michael Air, Gino Jeans, Mick Richards. I added myself in. It's really hard to reflect on yourself, but I just thought, well, I can see when I start to look at all these, the different eras in photography, I can start to see the gaps quite clearly. So while I'm talking to community and artists and photographers, we're having this constant conversation about, oh, is there anything in your family that might want to be coming into the library? How are you storing them and utilising the library resources around caring for your collections? So, yes, I'd like to also sort of prompt that inspiration today. And just before I go on, I just noticed down the bottom there, the late Lavon Babongi had recently passed away, but she was one of the few other photographers that I had met, you know, in Brisbane, and I also did feature her in a body of work at QPAC last year. I was able to just recognise her work. And I'm going to be working quite closely with the family about the storage of her work and how that can be made more accessible, but that'll take a long time. So with saying that in terms of storage, some of that's a really strong part of my research is looking at the digital storage, and that COVID and actually the floods really made that really present in my thinking. I was like, what's going to happen if something happens to my house or where I'm living, my material, my negatives, my slides and stuff like that, much like everyone else thinks about with their family photos and stuff. But I feel like as a photographer documenting Queensland history for 25 years, I felt a big responsibility is like, how can I actually look at this better. And particularly with COVID, when I was getting numerous phone calls from artists wanting an image to put into a grant application, like really quickly. So I'm working with my brother in my Driessens family, who's a program writer. I just had a really good chat with one of the IT guys. Yes, this week actually, I'm going to get those guys to talk computer language. I'm going to look at a really good domestic storage system, I think. And then hopefully, my hope is to share it with other photographers some of them are in the room today, but also make it like a little bit of a pilot and a case study, and then share with the bigger community, like storage systems and stuff. So I think it's quite fascinating. I didn't realise how much of a geek I was, but I really, really admire people's knowledge in that space. So yeah, if we just go through, you might have just read that all, but basically I really want to tie in. It's sort of like the way I've always worked. I'm not just a photographer, like a researcher, utilising the skills of all the people within the library, even at Arts Law, looking at the industry in a bigger scope. And just, it's amazing how many community aren't aware of the support services or ideas that can help them just with their projects and ideas. And I'm definitely encouraging more community to apply for these fellowships because there's so much work to do. I wanted to add this image in of Mervyn Bishop. I took this in the 90s. It's actually, and what I love about this photo, I love just seeing his camera bag. He looks really relaxed. It's actually the walkover from the museum, and it's before they had the roof. And just behind him is Avril Quayle walking. So there's all these things you can read in a photograph. But I think once we start working more closely with community about photographs coming into the collection, they'll have those kind of in-depth stories that will go with that image. And I wanted to share the really famous image, just for people who weren't aware of Mervyn, basically what he looked like, or even the image that you might have seen. I've seen this image going around the internet many, many times, and I feel really lucky that I've met people like him who, if anyone doesn't know the background of Mervyn, but he was one of the very first news photographic journalists in the mid-1960s. And we just obviously clicked, excuse the pun. We got to compare, notes around cameras and film and processing, and he would have just been in such an amazing environment, like a whole different world for him in that 60s environment. This is before I was born, clearly. But yeah, just the attitude toward, he would have seen everything on the forefront in the news, and attitudes around the country. Listening to those talks before about the crime and corruption, I'm sure he would have been in amongst that somewhere. So in closing, I just wanted to share, this was my light bulb moment when I had my own work there in the black folder of Cherbourg 1998, and then the early images in the folders from 1900. So it's just a little bit under 100 years captured of Barambah, Cherbourg. And I wanted it to just inspire others who are shooting in the field to consider looking at the collection, what's existing, or even their own family collection, and looking at that mirror sort of comparison of history. Because as far as I'm concerned, we're in a living culture, and the camera is literally an extension of who I am and what I do. So you would have seen me, I've just got it over there. There's my safety blanket. So yeah, I just want to hope that with that everyone out there in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and I've seen a lot of explosion of emerging photographers on the net since COVID. It's like, wow, another photographer. And that we can actually get them to the table and to bring their own lens perspective. So yeah, I think it was really hard to put that all into 20 minutes, but I hope that makes sense. And thank you for your time. Thank you so much to Dr. Catherine Mittelheuser and the Library Foundation and State Library staff have been absolutely incredible. So thank you.